Hello again. This is a video to show you how to do the DBQ, Constitution DBQ introduction that is due next week. All right, so first thing you got to do is you got to open up the documents you're going to need. So we're going to go to my website, again, where all the schoolwork is. So go to my website, and then you're going to go open up the schoolwork this week. All right. From Wednesday, I want you to open up a couple things. I want you to open up the Constitution DBQ, which is this, all right? And I want this one here. Come on, there it is. And then I want you to open up the image that explains um, the DBQ, not only the documents on the left side, but also what goes on the essay itself. All right, for this assignment, you will be concentrating on this part right here, okay? So you're just doing the introduction. The introduction should be 8 to 10 sentences, and it should be a hook, background, and thesis. All right, the hook itself. What is the hook? The hook is a story that you're going to write in order to get the attention of the reader. All right, so the idea of getting the attention is you want them to think about what topic you're going to talk about, but without mentioning the topic. Here, in terms of us trying to avoid a tyranny, our whole attitude was that King George abused his power and he was a tyrant. So we don't want a tyranny. And that's why we're going to use federalism and separation of powers and checks and balances and large state, small state compromise because we don't want a tyranny to come again. We don't want another tyrant to abuse our powers. So in your hook, what you're trying to do is come up with some sort of a short story that is going to get me to think about abuse, but not talk about King George, not talk about the writing of the Constitution, not talk about tyranny yet. Not yet. You're trying to get me to write a short story, 45 sentences, that it makes me think of a messed up situation, a story of abuse. Like you could write about a story where, don't, and by the way, do not tell me, imagine that this happens. Write it like it's happening. So I want you to write a story like, say, an abusive teacher. And when you write the story, I don't want you to say, imagine if you were in a classroom and the teacher did this. I want you to write it in first person, like if if it's going through you right now, like it's happening right now. So I want you to write a story like, I was in the, so I walked in my history class and Mr. Carvajal's there, and all of a sudden he walks over and just smacks me in the back of the head. And I don't understand why he hit me. I didn't do anything to him. But when I tell him, why'd you hit me? He says, because I can. And if you tell anybody, I'm going to give you an F in the class because he knows he has the power over my grades. So you are going to paint a picture of this situation where this happens, or maybe you paint a picture, not that's not the picture you want to paint. Maybe you do a short story of a police officer pulling over your parent or you later on when you get older and talk about how they abuse their power and how they talk to you. But again, don't say imagine a police officer pulled you over. Write a story where like pretending that you are going through it at that moment. So there's so many different ways that in society, in life, people's rights get abused. You need to come up with a story that makes the reader think about abuse, makes a reader think about somebody abusing their power without specifically talking about that or the tyranny or anything to do with this essay yet. The idea in your hook, that's 4 to 5 sentences, is to write a short story in first person that makes the reader think about abuse but doesn't specifically talk about tyranny. I don't want to mention anything about tyranny or the Constitution or King George at all in the hook. All of that information goes in the next section of the introduction, which is the background. In the background is where you're going to tell me, all right, what's going on? What's happening in this era? Why are they so worried about tyranny? So for the hook, you're going to make me think about abuse of power, and then in the background is where you start talking about it. So you just wrote a story about how messed up it was when a police officer pulled you over and how he abused his power. And then you transition in the same paragraph to your background where you say, that is an example of abuse of power. That is an example of how a tyrant can abuse their power. And then you start talking about what abuse of power these colonists went through. And that's when you start talking about things like they were the colonists of the British Empire. The British Empire told them what to do. They passed all these laws making them pay taxes. They never had they didn't have any representation in the government in England. They basically told them, we own you. You got to do what we tell you to do. Basically, King George abused his power. So these people wanted to fight back. So that kind of stuff is in the background. And then you tell me, um, and in the background, you got to talk about tyranny. And in the background, you got to talk about tyranny is what they were trying to avoid. And then you got to explain what tyranny is. So you in the background is where you talk about what the colonists went through, why they had such a big deal with tyranny, why when they wrote the Constitution they didn't want a tyrant to happen, and why they were looking to constantly put things into the Constitution that they would not allow a tyrant to happen. They did not want another King George. So you have to talk about them writing the Constitution. You got to talk about them. You got to talk about tyranny. You got to explain what tyranny is to the reader, and then you tell your thesis, and your thesis will be the same for everybody. The framers of the Constitution avoided a tyranny by using federalism, separation of powers, checks and balances, and large state, small state compromise. All that goes in one paragraph, 8 to 10 sentences. So I'll go over it again really quick. In the first part, hook, 45 sentences, you're going to tell a story in the first person where you're going to talk like, I am going through this. This is happening to me. I don't want to see, imagine this if this happened to you. So in the story, you're trying to make me think about abuse of power. Then in the background is where you bring in the idea that abuse of power is where you have a tyranny, and you talk about how the colonists did had a tyrant, which was King George, and how he abused their power, and how they wanted to fight back. And when they finally won the war and they wanted to write the Constitution, it was a big deal to avoid tyranny. Then in the thesis, you tell me how they avoided tyranny, which is that they did federalism, separation of powers, checks and balances, and large state, small state compromise. That is due on a Google Doc by Monday at 10 p.m. All right, so when you get the 8 to 10 sentences, you're going to have to open up a Google Doc. So you're going to have to go to your drive, and you're going to have to go to new Google Doc, and then you're going to have to title it. Okay, and your title is first name. We've done this many times. Last name, period, dash, uh, Constitution, DBQ introduction. Okay, you did that. Then you got to go over here to share. Again, some of you are not doing this, and now I'm going to start penalizing you for not doing this. You got to click here, and then you got to make it change this from restrictions or from AUHSD. So no restricted, no AUHSD, anyone with a link. You do not have to change this, and you do not have to share it with me. So open up a Google Doc, title it, make sure it's anyone with a link, put your title on the top, Constitution DBQ Introduction, and then start typing. 8 to 10 sentences, hook, background, thesis. Again, the thesis is right here, so you do not have to come up with it. This is your thesis. So you write the short story that makes you think about abuse, but you do not mention tyranny yet. In the background, you bring up tyranny, you bring up that they had fought a war, you bring up that they got rid of the tyrant King George, you bring up that a tyranny was a big deal to them when they were writing the Constitution, and then the thesis tells me what they did to avoid tyranny from happening, all in one paragraph. All right, so hopefully that helped you understand, and you turn this into Google resources as it says right here. Oh, no, I'm sorry, this is Wednesday. Here's the assignment for Friday. Again, only one introduction, 8 to 10 sentences, Google Doc. Then name it the same thing as I said I showed you. Anyone with a link. If you do not put anyone with a link, if you forget this step, I will mark it as late for not following that easy step. For simply not clicking here and making anyone with a link, I'm gonna mark it late. Why? Because grading has been a pain in the butt where I click on your assignment and it says that I'm not allowed to see it, and I get in a group of grading and I don't want to go back because you can't do a little click here. So for that reason, it's due by 10 p.m. Resources, Schoology resources, Schoology resources, 10 p.m. on Monday. Make sure you change it to anyone with a link. Thank you.